Hunting for Answers is a production of the Black Effect Podcast Network and iHeartRadio. March 13th, 1964, New York City. A young woman named Kitty Genovese was returning home from work shortly after 3 o'clock in the morning. What happened next would change how we understand human behavior forever. Kitty was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens. The assault and murder unfolded over multiple stages. According to early reports, dozens of witnesses heard her screams. And the headlines that followed would claim that 37 people could have helped and that no one did. Not until it was too late. The question that haunted America was simple. Why? Why did no one help? The answer would lead two psychologists, John Darley and Bib Latané, to study what happens when emergencies unfold in public and to identify what we now call the bystander effect. Welcome to Hunting for Answers. I'm your host, Hunter, and this is the first part into a 3-part series exploring the bystander effect, one of the most unsettling phenomena in human psychology. Why people freeze when they witness harm, why emergencies can happen in crowded spaces with no one lifting a finger to help, and why understanding this isn't just about psychology. It can be a matter of life and death. In this first episode, we're laying the foundation. What is the bystander effect? Where did it come from? And what does the science actually tell us about why we might fail to act? Joining me is Dr. Deborah Warner, who is a forensic psychologist, trauma expert, professor, and author whose work spans human behavior related to violence, trauma, and intervention. Let's start from the beginning. For someone hearing the term for the first time, what exactly is the bystander effect? At its core, it comes down to one simple idea. When everyone is responsible, no one feels responsible.
It's called the diffusion of responsibility. You diffuse that responsibility out to other people, and then nothing happens. You think someone else is doing it, so someone else is going to take responsibility, and it's really not your concern because somebody's probably done that. But you do that internally, right? And so that's why nobody does anything, because everybody's making that faulty assumption.
Diffusion of responsibility. It may sound like just a concept, but the reality is devastating. The more people present during an emergency, the less likely any single person is to help. Not because they're cruel, not because they don't care, but because they assume someone else will step up. This isn't just a theory. In one of their most well-known experiments in 1968, Darley and Latané staged emergency situations and measured how often people would intervene. What they found was striking. When people believed they were alone, about 85% helped. But when just one other person was present, the number dropped to 62%. And when people believed there were 4 other bystanders, the likelihood of help dropped even further to about 31%. So let's go back to where this all started. Kitty Genovese. Catherine Genovese, known as Kitty, was 28 years old. She managed a bar in Queens and was loved by her friends and neighbors. On the night of March 13th, 1964, she was walking home from work when she was attacked by a man named Winston Moseley. The initial reports were horrifying. The New York Times published a story with the headline, 37 who saw murder didn't call the police. The article claimed that 38 witnesses observed or heard the attack and failed to intervene over the course of about 35 minutes, and that no one had called for help. The public was outraged. How could 38 witness a woman in danger and do nothing? The story was seen as a sign that something was deeply wrong with how we treat each other in public spaces. But here's the thing. The story, as reported, wasn't entirely accurate. Decades later, further investigations revealed a more complex picture. The attack occurred in stages. Some witnesses heard screams but didn't realize what was happening. Some thought it was a domestic dispute. Others couldn't see clearly from their windows. And critically, at least one person did call the police, though the call came too late to save Kitty. As researchers Rachel Manning, Mark Levine, and Alan Collins wrote in a 2007 study, the narrative of 38 passive witnesses became a teaching story rather than a fully accurate account. Ambiguity, fear, and diffusion of responsibility all played a role. But it wasn't as simple as 38 people choosing to do nothing. Still, the case sparked a critical conversation. It forced psychologists to ask, why do people hesitate to help? And what can we learn from that hesitation?
They assume by this diffusion of responsibility that other people have taken responsibility. Then what comes into, if I step up, then I'm the one taking responsibility and maybe I don't know what to do. So then all their stuff, right, comes into being front and center and having to act and having to do all of these things, right? So that fear, there's what the fear comes in of having to act, is really about people paying attention to them.
In other words, this is what it feels like inside your head. When an emergency happens, our brains start running rapid calculations. Is this really an emergency? Has someone already called 911? What if I'm overreacting? What if I make things worse? And here's the kicker. Everyone else is thinking the exact same thing. When we think of the bystander effect, we often imagine dramatic, life-threatening moments. But the truth is, this phenomenon shows up in much quieter, everyday ways too.
You're at work and somebody is like being mean to a coworker, like you experience them picking on them or making fun of them all the time just because they're different, right? And you don't say anything. You assume somebody else has reported that to HR, or you assume that this person has stuck up for themselves, right? Now, the fact that you're saying nothing and you're assuming that, it's kind of the bystander effect, right? Acting itself out in the workplace. It's see something, say something, right? But nobody wants to be the one to step up, because what does that mean for me? What does that mean how my peers are going to see me? What does that mean for my job? They could blame it on me because I stepped up and said something, right? But these are all internal thoughts and talk that people are doing that causes them to freeze in that moment and just assume it's been handled.
Workplace bullying, harassment on public transit, witnessing someone being verbally abused in a restaurant. These aren't always life or death situations, but they matter, and the same psychological forces are at play. In 2024, a series of reports from London highlighted multiple incidences of women experiencing sexual harassment on public transport, including groping, verbal abuse, and unwanted touching. In some cases, women reported being harassed on London transport while other passengers looked on without intervening, leaving them feeling uncomfortable and alone. Shh. No one was killed. No one was seriously injured. No extreme violence was caught on camera. But the hurt was still real, and the silence was still loud. These real-life realities show how the bystander effect doesn't require dramatic violence to be powerful. It can show up in discomfort, in fear, in moments when people minimize what they're actually seeing.
All those people unconsciously are all like banding together unconsciously in a way to have this social construct of doing nothing, of realizing, hey, this is that person's problem or someone else has done something, so I'm just going to go about my day.
In many of the London incidents, no one reportedly had a weapon. No one was screaming for help. And that's why bystanding can thrive in these moments. The bystander effect isn't always just about crisis. It can be about how often we choose comfort over confrontation, how often we see harm and talk ourselves out of naming it. Over 60 years after the tragic events surrounding Kitty Genovese, we're still seeing the bystander effect play out in real time. And now, with surveillance cameras everywhere, we can watch parts of it happen, often without fully knowing what people could see, hear, or even understand in the moment. In recent years, several high-profile cases have renewed public debate about bystander inaction on public transit. In August 2025, a 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee named Irina Zarutska was fatally stabbed on a Charlotte area transit system light rail train. Surveillance footage showed multiple passengers present during the attack. Intervention appeared limited or delayed, with meaningful action taken only after the attack had already ended. In December 2024, Debrina K. Wam was attacked on a stationary F train at the Coney Island Stillwell Avenue station in New York City when a stranger set her clothing on fire while she slept. Video footage showed bystanders present during the incident, with limited or delayed intervention. Both cases sparked national outrage, and both forced the same uncomfortable question. How can something so horrific happen in public with so many people nearby? In May 2020, the world watched as George Floyd's life was taken by a Minneapolis police officer. The incident was captured on video and shared across social media in real time. For more than 9 minutes, George Floyd could be heard saying the words, "I can't breathe." And yet during that time, a crowd stood nearby. People recorded, people watched, people pleaded, but no one was able to stop what was happening. It was a crowd of people witnessing harm in real time, and no one could successfully intervene. It was a complex moment involving many factors, including psychology. And Dr. Warner explains why.
Their backgrounds, their history is irrelevant to what we're talking about, what the crowd was doing, right? So that is what we're really focusing on, not the actual case itself. So I just want to make sure so we don't begin to villainize by what I'm about to say. But looking at it, we have an authority figure and we have a crowd and we have someone who lost his life. Now, if we look from the beginning, right, that this is happening, he's saying, "I can't breathe." People are just standing. People are just watching. We have another person just directing crowds, not engaging, who was also part of authority, right? And what's happening, right? And then we have some people who begin to take out their phones and record. Now, they could have fear that something will happen to them, especially if they have an officer saying, move along, move along, move along, right? So you're taught to conform. Now you have this person still saying they can't breathe. Now you think this, diffusion of responsibility going on, where they're saying, well, this person's doing this person's doing that. Somebody has to be doing something, is what you're probably thinking, right? Somebody has to be doing something. So in the social context of it, nobody's really doing anything. Then you have the people who are trying to approach, trying to do something, and they're shoved away again by authority. And they think, well, they have guns. I could get shot. This is all going on. But they're not thinking as a group, they have more power. And I'm not saying to overpower police or do anything like that, but they're not thinking because they're not talking to each other. If they all would have spoken to each other and then created a diversion or a plan or something would have stopped that for a minute.
This is a key piece of the bystander effect that often gets overlooked. Authority changes everything. When people see police, security, or any form of official power, it can actually increase the bystander effect, not reduce it.
Authority figure comes into the situation, right? So you perceive that this person's going to handle it. You're more likely to diffuse that responsibility. Again, you're more likely to just let it go, right? So you're thinking, hey, authority has it. I'm not responsible. I can walk away. I can go home. I can get on that next train, right? Now, you're not realizing that maybe they've been told not to do anything either, and this person just keeps burning, right? But authority does change that. Or if authority says, you go do something. When you're taking like as simple as CPR training, you're told to have someone be that person who barks orders, right? Because people will just stand still. And so you take charge of the situation and you don't ask, you tell someone what to do. So that whoever comes on scene as an authority needs to begin to tell people, not ask people. It's not time for politeness because you're fighting all of those other things that we've just talked about.
The George Floyd case also brought to light another layer to the bystander effect: recording. Millions of people watched the video, and the reaction was deeply divided. And many asked the same question: why did people record instead of physically intervening?
You think that someone recording it, they're not responding. They're not doing anything, right? They actually are. Because if you think about it, if no one recorded the George Floyd case, we wouldn't know.
Recording can be a form of action. It can create accountability, and in some instances, it can also become a substitute for intervention.
That does make a difference. Now, I'm not saying do that and nothing else, because that's still not helpful, right? But recorders and people standing up, that's maybe their way of being involved and acting, is actually been helpful in today's society, right?
So in the George Floyd case, you don't just see diffusion of responsibility. You see authority inhibition, fear of legal consequences, fear of physical harm, group freeze, and the psychology of the camera, all happening at the same time.
Another thing in George Floyd is something people call pluralistic ignorance, meaning that everybody can assume that they can be ignorant to the situation and not do anything because, they look at others to define the situation, and it causes them to basically not interact. And it helps them staying calm in situations that they need to react to, because they can assume that, well, there's so many people there, we can just be ignorant to it.
So what does all of this mean? The bystander effect is a reflection of human psychology. We are social creatures. We look to others for guidance. We fear standing out. And when an emergency strikes, our brains can mislead us, convincing us that someone else will step up, even when no one does. When we know what's happening in our minds, we can fight back against it. We can notice that internal voice that says, someone else will help, and challenge it.
One thing I want people to understand also is you have all these unconscious beliefs about people, and everybody has prejudices and has things that they perceive. Everybody does. If you're honest with yourself, you know that you do. It could be that you don't like people who have noses that tilt slightly to the left, but you've never told that to anybody, right? Everybody has something. And sometimes people don't act because of how someone looks, because of their biases.
Social psychology research has shown that people's clothing and perceived social status influence whether others will help.
There was a study done in London where there was a homeless person who needed help, and it was the same actor, that they put on the street to get help. They dressed him as a homeless person and they dressed him as a business person. People were more likely to react when he looked like he was a business person because he looked less threatening to them. Then they did it with gender, and they're more likely to react to the woman. So you have all of these different phenomenons in yourself that you don't react to because of all of the prejudices or the thoughts that you perceived about people that are unconscious. And that's another thing you need to fight through, because you don't know that person. These are all things, again, coming from you, and what you perceive is your reality and your normal.
In the next part of this series, we'll explore how the media shapes our understanding of the bystander effect, and how coverage of real cases can either reinforce an action or inspire people to intervene. And in the final part, we'll take a look at how bystanding plays a role when people go missing or murdered, and why some victims receive more attention than others. If this episode gave you something to stop and think about, follow Hunting for Answers. You can also connect with us through our Facebook group and find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Reach out to us if there's a story or case you believe deserves attention. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Until next time. Hunting for Answers is a production of the Black Effect Podcast Network. For more podcasts from the Black Effect Podcast Network, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.